Welcome back to the Elmore Leonard Podcast. Before Elmore died in 2013, he decided he wanted his archives to live at the Irvin Department of Rare Books and Special Collections at the University of South Carolina. A few weeks ago, I was lucky enough to be at the opening of the Elmore Leonard Exhibit and got to meet the current and previous directors of the collection, Michael Weisenburg and Elizabeth Sudduth. Michael's the current director and is responsible for the exhibit, and Elizabeth was the director when Elmore decided he wanted his papers, notes, and letters with other literary greats to be preserved. I spoke with Elizabeth and Michael about what drew Elmore there, how the collection, which includes papers from Fitzgerald, Hemingway, and George V. Higgins, will continue to evolve, and about the value of crime fiction. The exhibit is simply fantastic and is currently open to the public in beautiful Columbia, South Carolina, and will be until mid-January 2026. If it's at all possible for you to see it yourself, you simply must. Elizabeth Sudduth, welcome to the Elmore Leonard Podcast.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if we're in a room that was part of where you did any regular business here at the, and it's the Hollings, no, we're at the University of South Carolina Library. It's the Hollings collection, but within the Hollings collection is the rare books. Where exactly are we? There's a lot of names here.
So you're actually in the Ernest F. Hollings Special Collections Library, and you were meeting earlier today with Michael Weisenburg, the director of the Irvin Department of Rare Books and Special Collections that's housed here in this building. And it's all part of the University of South Carolina Libraries.
Now, you are the previous director, is that correct?
Yes. Most recently, though, I was the Associate Dean for Special Collections. But when the Leonard Collection was acquired, I was the director of the Irvin Department.
So you are instrumental in all of Elmore's stuff being here.
I played a role, certainly, with a few other key people. So certainly the dean, some very high-level members of our Friends organization, the Leonard family themselves, Greg Sutter, Elmore Leonard's research assistant, and within the department, Jeffrey Makkala at the time was our archivist. And he actually did the pickup. So I know he would have a lot of interesting stories for you too.
Yeah, I'm hoping to speak to him. He's not in town,
Right.
And so we're gonna find a time to do that. At the time, Elmore, my understanding is that Elmore gave a talk here and saw the collection, which included Fitzgerald and Hemingway and George V. Higgins, and was really impressed. And that was the impetus that began the conversation. How long does that process typically take? Someone says, "Hi, I'm a pretty accomplished author. Do you want my stuff?" Like, how does that happen?
Well, actually, the conversation started some years before that. Elmore Leonard's researcher, Greg Sutter, came to use the Higgins papers. We were fortunate to have acquired the Higgins papers. That was the second crime fiction author that we acquired. We'd acquired James Elroy's papers in around 1999, and he continues to deposit, so that's a really important relationship for us. And through Matthew J. Bruckley, again, a very good friend and donor to this library, we connected with Loretta Higgins, George Higgins' widow, and he convinced her to place George's papers here, and in fact to bring papers that were at the Boston Public Library. Part of his collection was there, to bring that part of the collection here as well. So there are many different people interested, people who can have different conversations with authors. So Matt Bruckley was a fan of George Higgins, as was Matt Broccoli's partner in business, Richard Lehman. And Rick was instrumental in getting the James Elroy papers. They worked on that together, but I think Rick was the primary connection. And Rick really was part of this. So Matt Broccoli had passed away. He died in 2008. Okay. He never saw this building. But so in, I guess, 2011, 2012, we had been in conversation with Elmore Leonard, again, keeping that conversation going that had started some years prior. And it was the right time for him to start thinking about that. And so he was open to making a visit. We had our Friends Society at the time had an annual dinner, and we would always have an author speak. And so this was sort of the right opportunity for us to bring Elmore Leonard and family to check us out. And so he was here for a few days, and he had some great dinners, spent time with the dean, spent time with Rick Lehman.
Did he steal anything?
No, but he was kind of overwhelmed with all that we had. He enjoyed a tour of the vault. He talks a lot in his writing about reading Hemingway as a young author, as a young man, and then wanting, again, to write in a similar style. But what was interesting is he really appreciated on the vault tour seeing the Fitzgerald material that we had, and looking at Fitzgerald's ledger in the vault. And our Fitzgerald collection, which was established, came here as a gift purchase from Matthew J. and Ireland Broccoli. Dr. Broccoli was a foremost Fitzgerald scholar of his era. That collection coming here was a big deal. That really put us on the map as a special collections. And Elmore Leonard was just blown away by that, but he was also very excited. We had acquired a few of his things, and the things that we purchased were in a case of new additions to the collection, and also in that same case was a short story we had acquired by Fitzgerald, a manuscript. And that moment, seeing his material in the same case with Fitzgerald, really meant a lot to him. And we also had, among our friends, someone who had read a lot of Elmore Leonard, and he donated all of his books that were in his collection. Now, it wasn't it wasn't every copy of every title, nothing like that, but it was a significant enough amount of material that and the fact that we exhibited that really sent the message that we were seriously interested. And this would be a good place for that material to come. And then some of the other things as a smaller special collections, we were able to acquire something and process it in pretty much real time and have it available not long after acquisition. And that meant a lot to him too. Not that it would be in a queue and, it might come up 5 years from now for processing. So that meant a lot to them, that people would have access and that he would have, we've always guaranteed sort of priority access to the author themselves. Sometimes people need copies of notes and things, and that we turn those requests around within 24 hours. And so that was very meaningful.
Maybe there's a receipt and he needs to make a return.
Exactly.
So you need to keep your papers together. What does processing mean when you process a donation or archives? What does that?
As I think Jeffrey and Michael will tell you, it usually starts with a survey of what you have, and then looking at how it is organized to begin with. And in this case, it was very well organized. I believe that Greg had worked on it before it came to us. But then it's organizing it for future researchers and making sure that there are no staples. There's not, and that you're doing your best to protect things. So if you have a lot of photographs or a lot of media, you're making digital copies of the media. You're preserving the photographs. You're aware that different kinds of paper might have issues. You want to make sure that everything is preserved for the future, so it's stored in archival housings, and you're taking care of those conservation issues up front.
Why is your library, your collection able to do this faster than others where there's such a big queue?
Sometimes, it's because we're smaller. We're not the Ransom Center. We don't have
What's the Ransom Center?
the Harry Ransom Center, Texas.
I don't
You
know.
need to look them up.
I will. Tell me.
And a lot of contemporary authors, I mean, they're able to make really good offers on things. They have a wonderful climate control space, but they're also acquiring at a very high rate. We're not acquiring at such a high rate, so we're
Because you have better taste than they do. I'm curious, you mentioned Elroy before Higgins.
yes.
And I mean, Elroy he's still writing.
Yes,
And
but he was a very young. That was so early in his career. But of course, Matt Broccoli and Rick Lehman knew of his work, and were very smart in thinking this and encouraging the then Dean George Terry that this was something that they could do. Here's this young person. It's not going to cost a lot, and to buy his papers now, and they were so excited by it. But it worked out very well because we became the other USC to Mr. Elroy, and he loved that.
Sure.
Because he was not able to use library services in the system in California, and so but he got preferential reference service here.
He couldn't use the library in California?
Well, not in the, it wasn't easy. And here he could call up and somebody would answer his question, turn it around really fast. So it became an important relationship to him as well as to us.
At what point in his writing career did he make his, did he start working with you guys?
99.
99, okay.
That the first transaction was in 99, and he's been donating material here ever since. It's a continuous relationship.
Wow. That is really impressive. You've mentioned his name a couple of times, and I'm not sure I really understand who he is or what he did or what he does, but Rick Lehman, tell me a little bit about him.
So Rick Lehman, so you know about Matthew Broccoli, and Broccoli, the original publishing company he founded was Broccoli Clark. They published reference materials. And after Dr. Broccoli came to USC, sometime after that, he started working with Rick Lehman. Rick was a student, did his PhD here. And Rick went to work for the company. It eventually came Broccoli Clark Lehman, and Rick has now founded a new reference publisher in a new partnership, Lehman Papard. But they worked very well together, and they had, I think, mutual respect. They worked well together in the business, but they also, read a lot of the same material, and they were sort of in sync in terms of what they were following. And they're both very committed to seeing the special collections at this library attain a national reputation. Because when Matt Broccoli first came here as a professor, there were a handful of bibliographers in the English department who were also collectors. But the library didn't have a real special collections. We were more or less a treasure room. And it was really this group of people who got together who built the foundation. And then that allowed us to, we had the Garibaldi collection. We have historical material relating to South Carolina in the South Caroliniana Library, but the Garibaldi collection, the Scottish Lit collection, which is probably the largest Scottish literature collection outside of Great Britain, and then the Fitzgerald collection, that's really the foundation. If you have Fitzgerald, that allowed us to pursue a sizable Hemingway collection in the early 2000s, 2001, the Spicer and Easterling Holman collection of Ernest Hemingway. And because we had that Hemingway collection, we got the Grissom Hemingway collection because Edgar Grissom came and used the Spicer collection. So it all connects. You're always building out from that base.
Right.
And so, again, in a way, they explored, an opportunity with James Elroy, and it really fit really well. And then Matt Brockley had the opportunity to bring the Higgins collection here.
Higgins is somebody, and it comes up a lot. Elmore spoke about it a lot, how much influence Higgins had on him. Reading Friends of Eddie Coyle unlocked something. It freed him, I think is what he said. I'm just curious from your perspective, what's your take on Higgins and just his kind of general contribution to fiction and crime fiction in particular?
He's an excellent writer. His stories are really well constructed. And I think he's generally underrated by the average, I don't know, reader of crime fiction. I think there are a lot of people who, he passed away some time ago, so he's not, people aren't that knowledgeable about him. But I think if they picked up some of his work, they would be really surprised and would really think it was well worth the read.
What is it about crime fiction that is, Elroy, Higgins, Elmore, what is it about crime fiction that is of particular interest to University of South Carolina?
Well, we have faculty and students who have an interest, not necessarily always in the English department. So sometimes people, even in anthropology or the history department, express an interest. And but then also researchers are willing to come here. And we've had a lot of them over the years. So two other important additions to our holdings. We also have the Hammett family papers, and those came to us through Rick Lehman, who is the biographer of Dashiell Hammett. And so, again, you can see how this all comes together.
Yeah, it's spectacular.
And then most recently, we acquired the collection of Jane Hitchcock.
Okay.
And so we're really excited because, again, she's a female crime fiction author. And her books, again, are really, really well constructed. They're really interesting. And we hope to continue on from there. But I don't think those collections would have come here had we not already had strength. And of course, Rick knows very much about our strength and was able to have that conversation with the Hammett members of the Hammett family about placing that material here.
What's your favorite part about Elmore's collection here? What was something that when you saw it or you read it or you found it, it was, oh my gosh, this is special?
Well, it's complete. Its completeness, or the fact that it's nearly complete, means a lot to us. And that we have, you could have a business student who's looking at authors and, say, relationships between Hollywood and authors, or authors and their publishers look at the contracts, that we have the contracts. That means a lot. That's another part. And then Dr. Buckley was very interested in that too, the profession of authorship. How does this work? How do you get to the point that you can be a professional author and not have to have another job, and write in your spare time? And so knowing Elmore Leonard's story, and then having all of that material as well, not just
Right.
his drafts, then also having all the research, because that could be something too that at some point somebody could look at the research and the research files that really came from Greg as work for hire, working for Elmore,
Yeah.
that that how much that helped him, because again, he was really, in terms of productivity, producing
Yeah.
a really high volume. He couldn't have done that without support. But then you look at people like back in the day, Mishner. He had a team of young people working for him, and in the case of Greg and Elmore, Greg was out there doing research, following up on different threads of information and helping pull things together. No, you can't set up the scene this way because this doesn't fit with the city's geography, or this character couldn't have been doing this because of these other details. This won't fit together. He was really adding a lot in. Somebody could easily look at that role.
No, I mean, I think having all that stuff as a reference. Is there any sort of, I guess, just from a confidentiality standpoint, if I'm Elmore and I sign a contract, I feel like I can do whatever I want with it. But does Warner Brothers Studios feel the same way? Are people allowed to go look at those contracts for some of these movies or film deals?
The ones that are in the archive, yes. But I will say there are always things, or there can be things that will come into an archive that, if somebody came and picked up 100 boxes from your house,
Yeah.
you might not have looked in those boxes lately, so you may not realize what all is in there, right? And that 2010 draft of your will, or
Sure.
divorce papers, or your kids' report cards,
Right.
anything like that. So part of the conversation we have with the people whose archives we've acquired is, again, what is included, what is included, what is not included, what is available, and then what is personal to you.
Right.
Because and sometimes you always will come up with things, because again, if you have many boxes, and as you're clearing files after you finish a project, you just put stuff in a box, right?
Yeah.
And other stuff can get swept up in that. And then there are, of course, people who deliberately save every receipt and every bill and everything.
Right.
And then we also have the question of, well, do we really care about someone's bills, their electric bill? Do we care about that? Do we care about receipts? So and there is a case where we do, and that's a case of someone whose papers are here, who part of their life was they were a collector of books, and so their records of their transactions and their buying is actually of interest. So there are cases where someone's shopping might be interesting, but there are other cases where not.
So, I mean, it sounds like one of the things that is special about the Elmore collection, maybe compared to some of the other collections you have, is that it's not just the work itself and the research and the notes, but also documentation of his career, also personal effects. I mean, it's
Oh, and there was an awful lot of regalia. Yes, we did take a lot of. So we have his jitterbug. He wore Hawaiian shirts and sneakers. We have a pair of
what's
sneakers,
realia?
real things.
Is realia a real world? A real word?
Yeah.
It is.
Stuff. It's a nice way of saying stuff.
Stuff. Yeah.
And we'll look behind you. You can see all the hard hats from various groundbreakings and some other political memorabilia, some memorabilia. And we have a lot of his awards as well.
Yeah.
And some of that is in the exhibit. And his typewriters.
And his typewriters, which were often operated by his daughter Jane, who will be here.
Yeah.
I think tomorrow. Elizabeth, thank you so
You're
much
welcome.
for taking the time and for building this collection and making Elmore feel welcome. This is a really beautiful place you have here.
Very good. Thank you.
I'm sitting here with Dr. Michael Weisenburg at the great University of South Carolina. Michael, welcome to the Elmore Leonard Podcast. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's great to meet you.
It's great to meet you. Thank you for these wonderful facilities, this delicious coffee, this wonderful room, but mainly for these archives. So why don't you tell us where we are exactly?
Yeah, sure. So we are in the Hollings Library. Technically, it's the Ernest F. Hollings Special Collections Library. It's one of several buildings on the University of South Carolina campus. And it houses a couple of different departments, but for our purposes, one of its tenants is the Irvin Department of Rare Books and Special Collections, which is the traditional sort of rare books and special collections unit for the University of South Carolina libraries. What I do is I'm the director of the Irvin Department, so I'm the director of rare books. And I'm responsible for its day-to-day operations, for managing the faculty and staff, for overseeing collection development, curatorial programming, exhibitions, and for making sure that things are discoverable and accessible for researchers. I have a team of faculty and staff who work with me to make sure that people can learn from, appreciate, and work with the various historical items we have in the collections, some of which relate directly to Elmore Leonard.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm here, at least. You are a doctor.
Sure, I have a PhD in literature.
In literature?
Yes.
Okay. I know a lot of people who study literature.
Yeah.
I would not want them running anything. So how does... God bless them all.
Sure.
How did you become the director of the Special Collections Library?
Sure. So I've been working in rare books for about 10 years now. Prior to that, I did teach, university English classes like English 101 and, introduction or survey of American literature, that sort of thing. But I pivoted to rare books early in my career. And I initially came to this department to teach with the materials. There's been this pivot within maybe the last 15 to 20 years in rare books to become more open, to do more exhibitions, to make sure that we're doing outreach, reaching the community and the primary stakeholders. And in a university setting, the primary stakeholders are students. So how do you get students to work with rare books? Well, you teach classes about rare books.
Yeah.
And so I was hired to sort of teach with the materials.
Rare book sounds like a term of art or science. What exactly does rare books mean to you?
It's a little bit of both, actually, in a lot of ways. So the rare books could mean almost anything, and today it means a lot of things. Rare tends to mean there's a confluence of scarcity, right? There's not many copies. Primacy, a first edition, and value, either cultural and or monetary value. So cultural value, this is a really important book, say the first edition of the King James Bible, which we have a copy of here at South Carolina. It's also because these culturally important books tend to be famous. There's usually a high financial value to these books, and so we want to separate them from the circulating collection.
Yeah.
You can't just let someone take the King James Bible out of the building.
What if they're having a religious crisis, a crisis of faith? Not even then. Could they borrow it?
No, they couldn't borrow it then. They could come and look at it, and we are a public university, and so we do not turn people away. Anyone who wants to work with the collections, there are certain rules that have to be followed, and everything is done under supervision, but we welcome everyone to come and work with the materials. I've had middle school students come and do like their history projects here.
With an original King James Bible.
Those students actually, they were it was adorable. It was young girls who were doing their middle school history day project on the suffragettes, and we have the original newspaper run of the magazine The Suffragette.
Oh,
so
wow.
they came and worked with that for their project. I think they ended up winning top marks on history day that year.
That is, well, kudos to them.
Yeah.
How do they get to handle the material?
So with young kids like that, we wanted them to come with their parents, and we handled the material for them. I mean, it's not that I'm not going to let a kid touch a rare item, but you want to be very gentle with these things. But with, say, an average adult such as yourself, we don't wear gloves. That's sort of something we keep having to disabuse people of, the glove things. There are, of course, exceptions. Photographs and like flatware, like silver or metal, we'll have people wear gloves for that because your fingerprints can actually alter those items. But with a book, we say clean hands and a pure heart is what we tell people. If you wash your hands and you're very gentle with the books, these books have been handled for centuries.
Yeah.
They can be handled for centuries more. We just want to make sure people are careful with them.
Yeah.
We might have them in book cradles. We will teach people how to handle the books if they're not comfortable with or if they don't know how to.
Got it. So Elmore brought his collection here. He donated his collection to the University of South Carolina, or he donated his archives to the
Yes.
University of South Carolina. Why do you think he did that? Tell me a little bit about what else is here and what may have drawn him here.
Yeah, so this predates my time here, but I've heard the stories. And I'm under the impression of it was in 2012, I believe, and we can double check the dates on that. He was awarded the Thomas Cooper Society Literary Medal. It's a literary award that an old sort of library society here at the university used to grant to people. Ray Bradbury was another awardee in the past. They were awarding these to living authors in recognition of their work and their contribution to American literary culture. So he was awarded the medal. He came and gave a talk, and he toured the facilities. And as I understand it, he was very impressed by the collections here. We have excellent holdings in Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald. We're some of the best collections in the world to study those two authors. We also deliberately collect in 20th century crime and mystery fiction. So we have George V. Higgins' papers, for example, James Ellroy's papers, among others. And I think he was impressed by the fact that we were also actively collecting genre fiction. And what I'm told is after spending time here and meeting then director Elizabeth Sudduth and being treated well and seeing the collections we had, and not only how we were caring for those collections, but teaching within and exhibiting those collections, he felt like he wanted his papers here.
We're in Columbia, South Carolina. Elmore, he's written so many books. Many of them are set in Detroit. Many of them are set in Florida. Many of them are set all over. I don't know if there's any set in South Carolina. Elroy, I think, is mainly as an L.A.-based writer. George V. Higgins, a Boston-based writer. What is it about either their work that drew them here or about the university that was really interested in that work?
I think it has more to do with the university and how the university in the late 90s and early 2000s was actively looking to expand its special collections, especially its archival collections. And the fact that we had a set of scholars here at the time who were major bibliographers, and by bibliography, I mean people who studied the history of the book as a material culture, not necessarily like a list of things you referenced in your term paper. And so there were these major bibliographers here at the university in the 70s through the early 2000s. Matt Bruckley, Joel Meyerson, G. Ross Roy. These were people who were massive collectors in their own right. And they wrote about the material culture of the book and about literary biography. And so they were actively bringing living authors here to talk about their work as sort of the work of the business of writing, the business of publishing, that sort of aspect of studying the history of literature, the material culture of publishing and writing, which is, of course, the archival materials, the drafts, the letters, and the first editions and contracts and things that go into the work of an author, and how these books become material objects that circulate in the world as forms of art.
Do you think it's important for either the archives, for the collection? How should I refer to it? Should I call it the collection?
So the collection would be everything we have in the department. So people, this is an interesting problem, and I think the average person and even a lot of scholars misunderstand what the word archive means and what an archive is versus a collection versus a library. So an archive, I mean, and it's a complicated history, and there's not like one perfect clear answer here, but an archive, generally speaking, is the collection of the life of either a person or an institution or some combination thereof. So traditionally archives are institutional and they're municipal, right? The National Archives, the British Archives, the Vatican Archives, right? These are institutional archives.
Is that also here?
Yes, we have the Vatican Archives here. No. One of the best archives in the world though, right? And when we think about a literary archive, what we're thinking, and sometimes they're referred to as papers, right? And you'll see both words used when describing these in libraries, is the archive of Elmore Leonard is the sum total of the collection of his letters, his correspondence, his drafts, his research, but also the weird ephemera and realia of his life that came with the collection. There's a kazoo in the exhibit because it's part of the archive, right? There's his Peabody Award is in there. A baseball signed by George Kell is on display because he had one, right? And this was important to him and he kept it and he placed it here along with his papers. This lets you understand what it was like to be Elmore Leonard in a way that's more holistic and rich and deep than, say, just reading his novels, because he's not an autobiographical novelist, as he's very clear about in a lot of his interviews. There's all the interviews in the magazines that are a part of this. There's the clippings, there's the drafts, the original pulps. When he was writing Westerns in the 50s are all part of that collection. Yeah. And that is one collection that's in the library. And the library is the institution, the physical building, but also the intellectual institution that curates and preserves these materials. So the papers alongside the books, for example.
Thank you for that. For you, a professional director of this institution, how do you feel like you've done a good job? Like, what is the goal? What would be a practical result of this collection having done its job?
So everything we do is run by two guiding but sometimes competing principles, which is preservation and access. Preservation meaning we are going to preserve, protect, and elongate the life of these materials as long as possible. We have items in the collection that are from ancient Babylon. They're over 4,000 years old. We want to make sure they last for another 4,000 years, right? We have medieval manuscripts. We have first editions of, Milton and Charles Dickens and Jane Austen. And we want to make sure those last for centuries more. So we want to protect and preserve those materials. But we also want to make them accessible. They're useless if no one can learn from them. They're useless if no one can read them or hold them or look at them. So the part of access is doing exhibits like we've done for Elmore Leonard this year, using the materials in classrooms, making sure that researchers like Chad, who are writing biographies about these authors, get to look at the materials as richly and deeply as they want so they can write the most accurate and thorough scholarship that is possible about these subjects. It's also using them in the classroom and things like that.
Is one of the goals of either the university or the library to inspire a next generation of great literature, of great writers?
That would be part of it, certainly. But also great researchers or just people who are genuinely curious. There's a certain amount of literary tourism, too, that happens with these collections, and I support that as well. There are lots of times when people come and they're like, dads will be on tour with students deciding if they want to come to the University of South Carolina, and the dad will hear, I hear they got a Hemingway collection. And they come back here and they're like, where's the Hemingway? And I'm like, what's your favorite, and I don't question why they're back there. It's great that they're back. It's like, what's your favorite Hemingway book? Usually it's For Whom the Bell Tolls or The Old Man and the Sea. I was like, wait here. We sit them down, we get the first edition, and we show it to them because I want them to see that. I want them to have that experience.
Yeah.
And it's okay if all they get from that is, I got to see a first edition of Hemingway, and they go and they leave happy. That's great. But also, yes, we want to inspire the next generation of creatives, whatever that means. It might not be literature. It could be some sort of adaptation of this literature. We have all these medieval manuscripts that have music in them. It's basically Gregorian chant, plain chant. And they've just sat and...
Sing this one.
I can't do it.
Come on.
No, don't. I can't do it. I'm not a singer. I can read it. I can't sing it. But the point is we do have people singing it now. We brought music students in. These are kids that don't normally study medieval manuscripts. Usually the people who are studying medieval manuscripts are historians or paleographers or religious scholars. We brought the music students in and it was like, hey, could you sing that? And they start singing it. And like, okay, let's record an album. So we recorded an album with them. Okay, let's make a website where you can look at the medieval manuscript and then you can hear students chanting it. So you can literally hear the manuscript. So it's this multi-sensory experience of what it's like to sort of recreate and adapt this, 1,400-year-old dead object is alive again.
Right.
And they're doing original artwork, right? Chanting, singing, but also adapting this music for their senior theses or for their school projects, right? And that keeps this, what is an otherwise sort of dead object, right? A medieval manuscript, alive and relevant to young people today.
I'm going to ask you a question.
And we can do the same thing with Elmore Leonard. I'm giving you a non-Leonard example, but it's not something that I think you probably thought about. Most people don't think, we could sing medieval manuscripts, right? We could do things with Elmore Leonard that it might inspire kids to start writing Westerns again. I don't know. Or it might inspire them to write their own crime fiction. Or maybe it inspires them to make a movie or to make a manga, right? What would it be like for kids to do a manga version of Elmore Leonard?
Yeah.
Right? That sort of thing.
As a doctor.
Sure.
What is literature?
Okay. That's a big question. We can ask the big questions. Literature is a lot of different things, but usually, like, if you're going to look at it in its core sense, it is some creative, adaptive representation of the human spirit and the human experience. Whatever version of that you want. Love, great. Romance, but not necessarily. It could be Harlequin romance, like paperback pot boilers, but it could also be Tristan and Isolde, Romeo and Juliet, right? Which is also a pretty salacious and fast-moving plot. So it can be...
Does it need to be written?
No. Oral literature pre-existed written literature and still persists. These things aren't mutually exclusive, and when you have an emergent technology like writing, and I'm always telling my students, I know you don't think about it this way, but writing is a technology. Paper is a technology. Printing is a technology. It's something we invented to augment and adapt our experiences, just like cell phones and laptops and iPods. But no, oral literature long predates written literature, and it still persists. Oral literature exists today. Go to a bar and talk to a raconteur. Your crazy uncle who's got all these weird yarns.
Yeah.
That's oral literature.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Buffalo.
New York.
Yes.
How do you feel about the Bills?
Go Bills.
How do you feel about them this year?
I haven't kept up as much over the years as I should, although Josh Allen has gotten me back into the Bills.
Sure.
So there's that. I'm always hopeful, but never really expecting. I think that's what it's like to be a Bills fan or a Lions fan or a Browns fan, right?
I'm a Vikings fan.
Okay, there you go. And usually, even if I've been away from it for a while, I've been down here for a long time now, but I still get nostalgic about it, and I still get excited, and I still get my heart broken, and that's okay.
Yeah. Where does Elmore fit in here in the sense, because I'm sure that there's a little bit of thinking of, okay, do we want to become the home of his archives? How does it fit in with the other work? And he's probably an easy yes, I'm guessing. Where does he fit in terms of, from your perspective as the director of this place?
Yeah, so he fits in a couple of different ways. One, he's just a very important 20th century author, and we do have strong 20th century collections here at the university, and there was a desire to expand them, and so acquiring his papers allowed us to expand them. We do explicitly collect in crime fiction, and so that gave us a heavyweight, an anchor collection in many ways, along with Elroy and Higgins and a few others, to really solidify us as a place to be taken seriously for the study and preservation of crime fiction and popular fiction.
What about crime fiction is so important?
I think it's important because it's extremely popular. I think sometimes people, when they hear rare books, they think of some of the things I've mentioned earlier: medieval manuscripts, Babylonian cuneiform tablets, the first edition of Jane Austen.
All I think about is Babylonian.
Yeah. No, but I mean, like, what I mean is like, you think of things that are very old and very fragile and very austere, and then you start saying things like westerns and pulp westerns and crime fiction and sci-fi. We have an excellent Ray Bradbury collection, for example. People start to think, well, how is that a rare book? We have an amazing comic book collection. We're a top 5 school to study comic books. And you don't necessarily think of comic books as rare books, but if you have a first appearance of Action Comics or a first appearance of Amazing Fantasy 15, which is where Spider-Man first shows up, some of those comics are more valuable than the medieval manuscripts we have in the collection.
Yeah.
And I would argue they're just as culturally important. Because, I mean, think about media and think about the influence of the United States on the 20th century. It's this hugely influential sort of groundswell of middle-class popular culture, which is really the dominant culture. Most people don't read James Joyce's Ulysses, and that's fine. A lot of people read Elmore Leonard or have at least seen the TV and movie adaptations. A lot of people have read comic books, even if they don't want to admit they read Archie and Jughead and Betty and Veronica. They're valid, and they teach us a lot about the history of our culture. And Leonard does that. Leonard's an interesting figure because he worked in multiple media, and he had a very long career. He influenced a lot of people who came after him, and he influenced the industry and the culture he was writing about as he was doing it. And so because of that, we can use his collection to sort of capture this moment in time and understand one aspect of it. Is it holistic? Can you understand everything about American culture by studying Elmore Leonard? No, but you can understand a lot. And that's very helpful.
How would you compare that to what James Elroy brings?
It's very similar. There's a lot of actually overlap and parallel between the two archives and between the two authors. Often when I teach with their works in a classroom setting, it's usually not really for the literature classes, it's for the film and media classes, the television classes. And so we'll talk about adaptation, or we'll talk about the fact that they are thinking about how is this also going to be a movie, and what is that? What is the business of that? What is the sort of interaction between the two industries like? And Leonard's great for that because he's thinking about those things as he's drafting the works. He's working with his agents to sell the rights to both print and film productions simultaneously. Sometimes he's scripting out treatments. You can see how he might abandon one project but then adapt it into another. And the archive allows you to understand how both of these industries worked and fed off of each other in a way that I don't think the average media consumer fully understands or appreciates.
So just to use Elroy as an example, whose work is, I mean this as a compliment, his work is monstrous at times.
Yeah.
He writes big, long, dense, deep books. Mm-hmm. And I've heard him talk. I'm not sure. Have you ever?
I've met him, and he's come here a few times.
Fun guy?
Yeah, I like him. He's fun to be around. I think he's great.
I would love to get to meet him some way, somehow. But I've heard him talk a little bit about, just to use LA Confidential as an example, about how he really felt it was unfilmable. And the truth is, if you look at the movie versus the book, the movie is a sort of a sliver of the book, but I think it retains the spirit. I think it's true to the characters that he created. I think it's a great movie.
Yeah.
Both of them came up when movies had become maybe not the dominant form of culture, but
pretty close.
Certainly Elroy, and not Elmore wasn't too far behind. So just from your perspective as a doctor, how do you think, just in a general sense, how do you think having grown up with movies being so dominant impacted them as writers?
Some of them write, and some people, I just mean authors in general, I'll talk about both of them specifically. The idea of plotting and the idea of the advance of like visual, like viscerally feeling like you're there, dominates with some authors more than others. And when Elroy is at his best, I feel like you really feel like LA is happening to you while you're reading these works, in a way that's immersive. In
Whether you like it or not.
Sure, but that's similar to watching a movie. Whether you like what's happening on the screen or not, your suspension of disbelief takes over, and you feel like you cease to exist when a movie's good and engaging. You forget you're in a room with a bunch of strangers. You're that person. You're there in that moment, watching this thing unfold. That's really effective art pulls that off. Not all films do that. Not all books do that, but effective ones do. The other thing is it's visually you're being fed all of this information, but from a linguistic standpoint, it's the banter that sort of gets you engaged with really witty, this could be Humphrey Bogart and Catherine or Lauren Bacall. There could be this back and forth between characters that sort of sticks with you. And lots of people will quote their favorite lines from films or their favorite moments from films. This is a common thing to do. That's not all that different than 100 years ago quoting your favorite poetry.
Right.
And Leonard really, especially in the later half of his career, latches on to dialogue as being a driving force, not just for character, but for plot. And you start to see that propel in the second half of the 20th century. Part of this, I'm not saying it's absolutely 100% from films. It's also from television and it's also from radio. But it's from this shift to this electronic-based, distance broadcast-based form of art. Various forms of art that are driving towards sort of this conversational, representational form of experience, right? We're getting used to hearing in podcasts or an extreme version of this, these disembodied voice that live in our heads and that we sleep with and who we have parasocial relationships with, who feel like our best friends, even though we've never met them. And it's all driven by language. It's all driven by this back and forth talking. And in some ways, getting back to what you said earlier, it's not that different from an oral culture. Right, an oral literary culture where we're mostly talking to each other more than we are necessarily writing to each other.
Yeah.
I don't know if I actually answered your question, though.
Well, yes and no. So, all right, this may take us completely off course.
Sure.
Is YouTube literature?
Yeah, sure. I'll go with it. Or at least it's an art form. So here's the question, is the message the medium, right? Let's go with McLaughlin. The medium is the message. And to a certain extent, I think there is a truth to that thesis. I don't think it's an all-encompassing thesis, but media, especially in the 20th and 21st century, really took over. The form or the manner in which you consumed a piece of art really matters. And it changes the way you experience it. And people become fans of the form necessarily more so than the content. We have terms like cinephile, right? Someone who just loves movies. Well, what kind of movies I just love cinema. I love movie. I'm a movie buff. Okay, well, so do you love the form or do you love the stories that are being told through the form? And they're not mutually exclusive, but there are some people who just genuinely love the form and it doesn't really matter what's actually being communicated, right? Yeah. Oh, look at the depth of field in that shot. Think about the pacing and the cutting and all, the editing that went into this, or the way they used the soundtrack to manipulate the emotions of the viewer. It's all about the form more so than it is about the content. So is literature the form or the content? Well, it's the content, I guess, because the form could be oral, right? It could be speaking, it could be printed, it could be written, a book, or it could be film. It could be a podcast. I don't know. Harmontown is also literature. Mm-hmm. Right? In a weird sort of way. Radiolab is a way of communicating information that has a style and a function. A Radiolab episode when you hear it. It has the beats. There's a genre to this form of communication that is measurable and trackable, and you can compare other sort of other sort of examples of the form that are using the same generic tropes as Radiolab. Or you could compare the mania that is Dan Harmon to other people who are just personalities, because some podcasts are just personalities, but you build this narrative of a personality over time, kind of like autobiography in a way. Is cinema literature? Is YouTube literature? There are things on YouTube that I think we could call literature. The medium itself, YouTube is a form. Comic books are a form. It's a medium. Podcasts are a form. It's a medium. But there is literature happening in these different forms. So not all YouTube videos are literature, but they're all form, and some of them are literary, I think.
What classes are you teaching now?
Right now, I'm teaching a graduate seminar on collection development for future librarians and high school students.
How many of those jobs are there?
Well, every library needs someone who determines what's in the collection. So whether it's a public library or a school library or a university library or a private library, someone has to curate it.
How many libraries are there in the U.S.?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. We could go on the ALA website and take a look. I don't know. But there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's probably thousands.
I'm always fascinated when I go to a library and I see the new stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like half the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And the building isn't growing.
No.
So it's like, what happens to the old stuff?
It depends on the library and it depends on what their rules and systems are. Some of it might be stored off-site, depending on how big of a system it is. Some of it's being deaccessioned. Often public library deaccessioned. So when you take a book out of the library.
Out of access?
Well, it's just no longer part of the library. You might be deaccessioning it, and it'll be no longer library material. So have you ever gone to well, not necessarily. It's really weeding is.
Do you tell the authors?
Weeding is important to the health and longevity of most collections.
Okay.
Usually special collections and rare books departments are kind of exceptions to this. But take your public library, for example.
Yeah.
I don't know what the hit books are going to be this year, but what's her name? Gilbert's coming out with another sort of memoir, a really dramatic memoir.
Okay.
And there's probably going to be, most public libraries are probably going to have multiple copies of this book for book clubs, and they just know there's going to be a run on people wanting to borrow this book. It'll be popular for a year or two, and then the popularity of this book will wane, and they'll reduce the number of copies they have to maybe 2 or 3, and deaccession the other copies. Now, you've probably been to like a Friends of the Library book sale.
Yeah.
Some of those are books that were donated just to sell, to raise money for the library, but some of them are probably deaccessioned books. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if the book isn't being used and it's taking up space for a book that would be used, and again, I'm talking about this very broad strokes here in a public library setting, if someone else can get use out of that book by buying it and helping fund the library and then taking that book home with them and then maybe giving it to a friend or loaning it, the book is still getting used in a meaningful way, and it's no longer a space burden on that library, and they can use that space to get the next bestseller.
Yeah.
And, that sort of thing. It doesn't mean that all of the copies go away and no one has access to the book. It can get more complicated than that. I'm using popular reading as an easy example to explain why weeding is important and why it's sensible in a way that I think most people find reasonable and acceptable once they get over the shock of the idea that a library might get rid of a book. Because people hate the idea of getting rid of books. Even people who don't read hate it. And I appreciate that emotionally and intellectually. But sometimes you have to think about what's best for the users of that collection. Making sure that the collection is vibrant and growing and fluid is important.
Elmore was somebody who, over time, and because of how he started off, he was writing short stories, he was writing for the pulps.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't write novels right away. The first early novels were much more genre.
Yeah.
For the most part, I think Elmore got more ambitious as a writer as he went, and which is one of the really impressive things about him. Who is somebody writing today that you think maybe started off doing things that were easily dismissed, similar to Elmore, but are becoming, or in your mind will become, as much of a master as Elmore?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know that I have a very good answer, because a lot of my contemporary reading is sort of haphazard. I'm really well read in the old stuff because I've got those 3 letters at the end of my name. And with contemporary literature, I kind of just read it haphazardly as just sort of a consumer would read it. Yeah. So I'd have to, I'll get back to you on that. Let me noodle with that a bit. Who's someone who has started out kind of like as a genre writer and is really sort of pivoting to more literary work? I think we're living in a great age of genre writing. I will say that. People have really, and part of this is like the fantasy boom. Part of this is the dystopia boom and the YA boom. There's romantasy now. So there's this real
Sounds
Portathons and
sounds
birds
like
and
my
roses.
high school
Yeah.
social life
I mean,
romantasy.
yeah, well, actually, a lot of these books feel like a lot, just like the idealized version of our high school social lives, but just in a world of elves and fairies, right? But they're deeply entertaining.
Yeah.
And people do love them. And I think as a broader culture, at least in the United States, I don't want to speak for other cultures, there has been this revival of genre fiction and this embrace of genre fiction by bourgeois middle class culture.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because A, it's enjoyable, it's accessible, but B, I think we're living in a time, and times are a bit awkward. We're living in interesting times, I guess. I'll just say it that way.
Sure.
And part of the appeal of literature and fiction is escapism.
Yeah.
And what is often considered high literature is usually hyper-realist. At least in the 20th century, it was sort of hyper-realist, and there might be a tinge of social commentary to it.
Give us an example.
Well, I mean, think about like John Updike, right, in the 20th century, writing these stories about middle-class, middle-aged men who are going through crises. And I'm not saying that to dismiss John Updike. I like John Updike, and we have an excellent John Updike collection here. Obviously, it's not as good as Harvard's, but it's, we have an admirable collection of his works here.
I think it's way better than Harvard's.
No, I can immeasurably. It's anyway. But there's a certain sort of what he's writing about and what his contemporaries are writing about is, kind of like what day-to-day life was like, just in an extreme form. Or even some of the satires of that period. Take Portnoy's Complaint, for example, which is not necessarily a realist novel, but it's using sort of an exaggerated form of that sort of anxious male trope from the mid-20th century to make some sort of social comment. I don't know. I mean, we're all so exhausted with the news cycle. We're so exhausted with things that have happened over the past 15 years or so that when people read, they don't want to read a satire of the drama that is our daily lives. They want to read something that makes them feel liberated, that makes them feel validated, that makes them feel happy, or that gives them a sense of escape or wonder. Even dystopia, which people look at as being, this grim, foreboding telling of the near future, it's still escapist because there's a hero always at the center of all of those novels. And I think that's part of why genre fiction is flourishing. The other reason is literary culture has gotten a little bit less pretentious over the past 25 years or so. There's nothing shameful about being a best-selling author and making sure your audience is happy, and making sure that you're sort of giving them what they want because it's also what you want as a creator. So there's a lot of that.
What is an author like Elmore able to capture that another excellent writer cannot or does not, do you think?
That's a good question. And there's a certain alchemy to this. We can try, and people are trying to do this now with like big data. What is the structure you should be doing in order to write a hit book? Make sure you have these plot points and these beats, and you set up these emotional expectations. But there is a certain amount of lightning in a bottle with some of these authors. And authors who are as prolific, like Leonard, or like take Stephen King, for example.
Sure.
They're also uneven, let's be honest. And it's easy for us to create narratives about some of these really prolific and influential authors because there's just so much there to work with. It's easy to pay attention to certain aspects of their career and ignore others. That's not to diminish them or to say that the parts of their career that are influential aren't. They're extremely influential. But it's also to admit sometimes there's a lot of slush there. And I'm not saying that to dismiss Stephen King. I'm a huge Stephen King fan, but they're not all hits, right?
But it also it feels like he writes more than one book a year.
Yeah, and he's talked about this, right? It's easy to sort of understand how he's able to pull this off. But there's a certain some authors latch. You see it with music, you see it with film. Some people are able to capture something that resonates with the broader culture. And this can happen in two different ways. One is they're actually mirroring the culture. All of a sudden, people are really going to feel seen by some aspect of how this piece of art is expressing it. It might be formal, it might be content, but the audience is going to feel something a shock of recognition
Yeah.
in the work of art. The other way an author or any artist can do this is to push the culture in a new direction, right? Andy Warhol does this with pop art, for example. The artist produces something the culture didn't know it needed, and they become an initiator of discursive practice. They tell everyone else, this is how you do it from here on out.
Right.
And then they'll have people who sort of follow in their wake to sort of reproduce versions of that form of culture to greater or less effect.
What
Now, what about Elmore Leonard that does that? We could debate that, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. What is something that we do hope, and the exhibit is going to run for several months.
Yeah, it'll run through January.
What is something that, hopefully all of our millions of listeners will come. But what is the first thing they should look at while they're here?
The letter that Margaret Harper sends to Elmore after she reads his first short story and says, we should work together and I can be helpful to you and you can be helpful to me. He was a great author, but he was successful because he had people who believed in him and who helped him. And he appreciated that help, and he took their advice seriously.
Absolutely. She discovered him.
Yeah.
She discovered him, and then at a certain point in time, when it became too much, introduced him to H.N. Swanson. And
But it's the type of thing that the art... I use that as an answer because it's the type of thing that an archive has that another place... Nowhere else in the world does that letter exist.
Yeah.
You come here to see that letter or letters like that. You can find a first edition of any of his books.
Right.
You can't necessarily find the pulps as easily, but they're out there. You can't find that letter because it's here, right? So that's why I'm using. It's right there at the beginning of the exhibit. It's one of the first things you'll see, and it sort of sets the narrative going, right? That's the beginning of his career. It's that interchange.
That was a huge moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
How annoying was it to find out that Chad Cushions had some of Elmore's original letters?
It wasn't. That's always there's no archive that is complete. There are other Elmore Leonard letters out there that, it would be great to hear if someone's listening to this podcast and they're like, oh, I've got a Leonard letter. It'd be great to hear from them. And maybe that letter could become part of the collection. When we were putting this exhibit together, Margot, I'm blanking on her last name now. She wrote the book, The Blue Tattoo. Margot Mifflin, The Blue Tattoo, which is an academic study of Southwestern sort of indigenous and white culture interaction. And Leonard had written a short story based on the same events. So he blurbed her academic book. And his blurb is actually on the cover of her academic book. And she saw that we were putting together the exhibit just through an announcement that we made about the exhibit. And she emailed me and she's like, I have the letter. Do you want it?
Wow.
I was like, yes, of course. So I put it in the exhibit.
It's amazing.
It is. So and my point is, you can have a very comprehensive and an extremely extensive archive like we do for Elmore Leonard, but there's some people kept the letters, right? And they're out there in the world still. And it's always possible that they could find their way here. Michael,
Dr. Weisenburg, thank you for taking the time. Thanks for all that you're doing. Thanks for having this event this week. And everybody who can come to South Carolina should definitely come check it out. Michael will buy you coffee if you do.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Jed.
The Elmore Leonard Podcast is produced and edited by Judd Rubin. Music by Greg Ahee. Hosted by Judd Rubin and Alex Leonard. Executive produced by Peter Leonard. Copyright 2025, Elmore Leonard Inc. Please visit us at elmoreleonardofficial.com or send us an email at hello@theelmoreleonardpodcast.com.